right, so first story right off the top here. So the DOD Directive 5240.01, the stealth expansion of military intelligence powers in life or death domestic scenarios. That's kind of the title of it. They say as the U.S. nears a pivotal election, the quiet expansion of DOD Directive 5240.01 may grant military intelligence unprecedented authority to assist law enforcement in life or death domestic scenarios. They continue on here. Imagine waking up to discover that the U.S. military has quietly been granted the authority to assist in domestic law enforcement activities, including the use of lethal force against U.S. citizens in certain circumstances. Now consider that this change was enacted just weeks before the election, already surrounded by concerns about unrest, civil liberties, and potential government overreach. Before we get into this, let me quickly give a shout out to today's sponsor, TWC Health. You guys know I've been talking about TWC Health a lot because we've got all the craziness going on, whether it's the docks shutting down, whether it's strikes with now Boeing is having some strikes. So far, it hasn't affected the airlines, but it might. And we're in conflict in Iran and Russia and China and South Korea. So, they're sending the hackers at us to shut things down. So make sure that you get yourselves protected. This is the wellness company. They've got medical emergency kits. And these are not like aspirin and Tylenol kind of stuff. This is the good stuff. They have, they say here, they treat over 30 medical conditions, including anthrax and the plague. That's pretty based. Bite wounds, pneumonia, parasitic infections, STDs, sinus infections, strep throat. I know for those STDs, I know some of you guys out there need to get that. Then you don't have to do a doctor visit because you just went out and hooked up with a Tinder date on a Friday night. Travelers runs, they even have antifungals in this thing. And check this out. I just found this the other day. This is from Science Direct, which is a study on ivermectin. It's a potential anti-cancer drug derived from the anti-parasitic. So this is definitely good stuff, guys. Definitely good stuff. So make sure to hop over twc.health/oddmanout. Use code oddmanout to save $30 plus free shipping. Get yourself a medical emergency kit. The best day in the world is a day you don't need it. The worst day in the world is when you need it and you don't have it. As we here in the U.S. prepare for one of the most controversial and closely watched elections in its history, a concerning update to DOD Directive 5240.01 has been quietly put into effect, reissued on September 27, 2024. This directive governs the Department of Defense intelligence activities and now includes provisions authorizing lethal force in certain circumstances when assisting civilian law enforcement. While the directive forbids assassination, it opens the door to lethal interventions under, quote, national security conditions, albeit with the stringent restrictions on how such interventions are to be authorized. They say the reissuance of DOD Directive 5240 repealed previous versions, including the 1982 DOD 5240-1-R. While the update might seem routine, the changes regarding the use of lethal force in domestic operations are significant. In the 2016 version, Directive primarily focused on intelligence collection and ensuring civil liberties for protections for U.S. persons. It emphasized strict oversight and the need for authorization before collecting U.S. persons' data. However, the 2024 version expands the military's role, particularly in assisting civil law enforcement and authorizes lethal force under specific conditions, raising questions about its use during potential civil unrest surrounding the election. The 2016 focused on ensuring strict oversight for operations involving U.S. citizens, meaning they had strict oversight. They're going to police and watchdog the DOJ, or the DOD, to make sure they don't overstep. Intelligence collection restrictions limiting when and how U.S. persons' information could be collected. And they had privacy safeguards protecting privacy rights and preventing unauthorized data collection. The new provisions in 2024, they say the use of lethal force. Directives allow military intelligence components to assist law enforcement in operations that involve lethal force. Conditions for force. The directive specifies lethal force can be used under conditions involving imminent threats. Now, the reason why that's important is if you remember the J6 breach of the building, half the people in the building were peaceful and they're just meemaws walking around and googling and checking everything out. And the other half are the ones that were busting in windows, breaking things, and pounding on, I believe it was the Senate door. It might have been Congress, but I think it was the Senate door. And that's when Ashley, gosh, if I remember her name correctly, was it Ashley Bobert? Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt. That's when she caught a round in the neck because one of the guards on the other side of a door put one through her neck. And as she fell to the ground, 2 police officers were right there to catch her, meaning she wasn't an imminent threat. She was right there. There were other police on the same side of the door as her, and they didn't have weapons drawn. They weren't in a position to take her out. But a guy on the other side of the door inside the chambers there, he put one right into her neck. Well, don't you think if they can say something like this is imminent threat, I could see them standing on a balcony and just opening rounds into a mob that's running into a building like that. And then later on they say, well, you know, we had lethal force authorization because we felt it was an imminent threat. They also say any use of lethal force must comply with DOD 5210.56 and ensuring proper legal frameworks are followed. And here are the civil liberty concerns. The expanded role of the military in domestic efforts is allowed by the updated directive raises several civil liberties concerns. The right to protest. There are fears that expanded authority could suppress legitimate protests. Right to privacy. Increased military involvement in domestic intelligence gathering could infringe on privacy. Due process. The military's role in law enforcement could bypass standards to process prosecutions. Freedom of speech. The broad definition of national security threats could target individuals for their political beliefs. And civilian control. The expanded military role could erode civilian oversight of the military. They say the constitutional crossroads, fundamental rights at stake. The recent reissuance of DOD Directive 5240-01 represents a significant legal shift that could potentially compromise core constitutional protections that we hold dear. The directive opens the door to scenarios that may threaten these freedoms. Now, but before I read these, understand how this would go. Let's go back to the year, I believe it was 2020. I think it was maybe it was, Trump was in office. So I think it was March of 2020. I think it was. Anyway, Antifa storms the White House. They've injured, I think, something like 600 police. Trump goes down into his bunker safe room. If the Secret Service and the DOD decide to use lethal force on these protesters, the media is up in arms. The media is screaming that Donald Trump's Department of Defense and Department of Justice and Secret Service shot innocent kids that were just protesting. It was mostly peaceful, even though they were throwing bottles and they had shields and they had batons and they were beating up on cops, but it was mostly peaceful. And Donald Trump let his Department of Defense and Secret Service end these kids. Kids, right? And they're minorities and they're protected classes, and Donald Trump is the worst person in the world. Flash forward to January 6th. Same thing's happening. They're storming. Oh, the president had to do this. It was an insurrection. They were going to overthrow and possibly destroy our senators and congressmen. They were going to unalive all of them. And we needed to use this lethal force. Thank goodness we changed this so this was allowed. This is how it's going to work. And you know it, and I know it. This is because it's all about the media framing. This is why I say, right now, if you really want to know who the enemy of the people are, in first place is the government, all government. Everything larger than the lady that delivers my mail. Any higher office in government, they're probably your enemy. Number 2, the media, because the media paints the narrative that will fool all the gullible, low information people that don't pay attention and they just happen to listen to CNN or MSDNC in passing, and they hear this and they say, oh my God, I can't believe Donald Trump would do this. Or, oh my goodness, thank goodness that our DOD could protect our government. It was almost an overthrow by these crazy right-wingers. That's how it goes every single time. And this is why it's dangerous, and that's why the media right now is so dangerous. That's why they're so threatened by Rumble and X and other platforms that are allowing people to get the information directly from the people in the know without it being bypassed through the lens of the activist media. And that's very important to remember. That's what really makes this risky, is because the media will cover or attack whoever's in power either supporting or damning something like this. Because, again, there are protesters that protested certain events that took Molotov cocktails and threw them into police cars. And after arrest, a couple months later, they were let out on either bail or no, it was cashless. I'm sorry. They were just let out. They were put on probation, if I remember correctly. There was a male and a female, and they were attorneys. And they tossed a Molotov into a police car, and after a couple months in jail, they were just released on probation. Then you've got people that just walked around the Capitol, and they're still in jail today, 4 years later, and they haven't even had a trial. Don't think that this two-tiered system won't come for you. It will, and it'll be used against you, and the media will prop it up, either as an attack or a defense of it, depending on if it's conservatives that happen to use it. Here's the threats to freedom, challenging the Posse Comitatus Act. This act traditionally limits the powers of the federal government in using military personnel for domestic law enforcement. The new DOJ directive, by permitting the use of lethal force through military assistance in civilian law enforcement, may push the boundaries of these limitations. Potential First Amendment concerns, natural health advocates and others exercising their First Amendment rights, such as questioning the government's response to COVID or the integrity of elections, have been labeled as potential domestic extremists and or terrorism by some agencies. This directive could expand those classifications into scenarios involving lethal force intervention, possibly chilling free speech under the guise of national security. Fourth Amendment considerations. The directives also allow intelligence sharing between military and law enforcement under emergency conditions, raising questions about the right to privacy and the potential for expanded surveillance. Due process implications. The Fifth Amendment. The possibility of military uses of lethal force in domestic scenarios introduces concerns about how due process protections might be maintained before potentially life-altering decisions are made. So they write up a nice conclusion here, but the sources that were used is DOD Directive 5240.01 and the Department of Homeland Security's National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin. So it's straight from the government. If this doesn't worry you, I don't know what does. It should worry you, because they're going to expand it and they're going to use it. And if it were, again, if it were the left doing something, then, and the government was conservative, or whoever's in power conservative, then the press will attack the government. And if it's Democrats in power and it's conservatives that were protesting or rioting or whatever, the media will protect, again, the government. That's kind of how this goes every time.